Gunfire ripped through the sterile Pentagon corridor, sparks leaping off steel doors as chaos bloomed where silence should have ruled. Captain Daniel Harris said, "This place was secure. How did they breach it?" His voice cracked under the echo of ricochets. Sergeant Mark Riley staggered, his uniform shredded by bullets, leaving crimson streaks against the polished floor tiles. Mark Riley said, "Daniel, the name. Find him." His voice trembled, a whisper wrapped in death. Daniel Harris dropped to his knees, cradling the dying man as alarms wailed. Smoke curled down the hallway, painting shadows across the fluorescent light. The confusion was suffocating, every breath heavy with gunpowder and betrayal. A classified file folder slid across the floor, tossed into a burning barrel by a fleeing figure. One page slipped free, drifting like ash through the chaos. Daniel Harris lunged, catching it with trembling fingers. Colonel Richard Kane appeared at the far end, framed by smoke, his calm expression cutting through the storm. Colonel Richard Kane said, "Seal the wing. No survivors, nothing leaves here." His words were chilling, delivered with surgical precision. Daniel Harris clutched the page, his eyes wide with disbelief. The page bore a name that the Pentagon swore never existed. He felt his sanity teeter on the edge as gunfire roared again, closer this time. From the shadows, a silent figure moved. Agent Sarah Mitchell, her face hard, her stance unshakable, raising a suppressed weapon. Sarah Mitchell said, "Orders are clear. He's not supposed to exist, Daniel." Her words cut deeper than any bullet. Daniel Harris's world shattered. The friend bleeding in his arms, the superior demanding silence, and the agent sworn to erase him. He whispered, "Why erase the living when the truth is already bleeding out?" The words dissolved in the gun smoke. The alarms dimmed into a haunting rhythm, and the lights flickered as if the Pentagon itself recoiled from the betrayal. Daniel Harris felt time collapsing, each second a countdown to silence. The page in his hand trembled as though alive. It carried a forbidden truth, one too dangerous to speak, too heavy to hold. Daniel Harris stared at it, knowing this was the first breath of a war the world was never meant to hear. Daniel Harris sprinted down a narrow service hall, alarms pounding like war drums. His breath tore ragged from his chest as he clutched the charred page. Daniel Harris said, "Why erase a man's name from history? What's worth killing for?" The page burned his palm as if alive. Behind him, Sarah Mitchell's footsteps echoed like a predator stalking prey. Sarah Mitchell said, "Daniel, stop. You're only making this worse." Her voice carried steel, yet trembled with something buried. Harris pushed harder, his boots slamming against concrete. The walls felt closer with every step. Richard Kane's orders crackled through intercom speakers. Richard Kane said, "Terminate the breach, contain the fire. Nothing escapes." The words were clipped, sterile, like execution orders dressed in procedure. Daniel Harris burst into a maintenance bay, filled with shadows and the acrid scent of oil. He pressed against the wall, pulse hammering, as the page crumpled in his sweat. Smoke seeped in through vents, curling like fingers reaching for him. The sirens wailed, drowning out thought. Daniel Harris said, "He's not a ghost, he's flesh and blood. Why deny he lived?" His voice cracked with desperation. Sarah Mitchell stepped closer, weapon steady, her face unreadable. Sarah Mitchell said, "You don't understand, Daniel. You're already part of it." The page in Harris's hand shook violently. Its ink seemed to darken in the flashing red light. He stared at the name, each letter pulling him deeper into paranoia. He whispered, "If this is true, every war I fought was a lie." His knees threatened to buckle. Colonel Richard Kane's footsteps echoed like verdicts as he entered the bay. Richard Kane said, "You should have burned with that file." His calm tone masked venom. Daniel Harris raised the page higher, hands shaking. Daniel Harris said, "This name exists. You can't kill memory." Sarah Mitchell's gaze flickered between Kane and Harris, her weapon unsteady for the first time. Her breath caught, revealing a sliver of doubt. Kane's stare burned with cold authority. Richard Kane said, "Erase him, Agent, or join him." The choice sliced to the air. Daniel Harris felt betrayal close in like suffocation. Mark Riley's fading words echoed in his skull. The page trembled in his hand, a lifeline and a death sentence. Daniel Harris said, "If this name dies, we all die forgotten." His voice rose over alarms. Sarah Mitchell's eyes filled with conflict, her weapon lowering a fraction. Sarah Mitchell said, "You don't know what you're up against." Behind her, Richard Kane's jaw tightened with fury. Richard Kane said, "History is what I say it is." His words snapped like chains. The alarms roared, and Harris made his choice: run or be erased. His boots slammed the ground as he lunged toward the exit. The page clutched like truth itself, while gunfire exploded behind him. Daniel Harris sat alone in a dim motel room, rain tapping against cracked windows like a metronome of dread. His uniform lay folded in the corner, metals gleaming under a single flickering bulb, each one feeling stolen. Daniel Harris said, "They pinned lies to my chest." His voice broke with bitterness. On the bed lay the charred page, the ink smudged yet the name unshaken, mocking his sense of loyalty. He traced the letters with a trembling finger, sweat dripping from his brow. He whispered, "If he never lived, then why am I the one haunted?" The television crackled static, briefly flashing images of soldiers overseas. His reflection in the screen looked foreign, hollow eyes, gaunt face, jaw tight from sleepless nights. Sarah Mitchell's words replayed like a curse. Sarah Mitchell had said, "You were never meant to see this." The rain outside grew heavier, drowning out the city's heartbeat. Daniel Harris reached for a half-empty flask, gulping down fire that burned but never cleansed. He muttered, "They erased a man. They'll erase me next." His voice was hollow, carrying the weight of inevitability. Daniel Harris stepped into his kitchen at dawn, staring at family photographs taped unevenly to the fridge. His hands shook as he brushed across one picture, himself in uniform, flanked by his sister Emily Harris. He muttered, "Was that honor built on a grave no one remembers?" Emily Harris entered quietly, concern etched on her face. Emily Harris said, "You haven't slept in days, Daniel. Tell me what's happening." Daniel's eyes darted to the charred page resting on the table. Daniel Harris said, "It's not safe, Em. Not for me. Not for you." His tone cut deep. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand, but he recoiled, paranoia thick as smoke. The weight of silence pressed heavy. Emily Harris whispered, "You're scaring me." The words cracked his composure, and guilt carved into his face as he turned away. Daniel Harris walked the Pentagon Memorial Courtyard, morning mist curling between engraved names on polished stone. He brushed his hand across cold granite, stopping where the heiress name should have been. Daniel Harris said, "He fought. He bled. Why is he not carved here?" His voice cracked in despair. Nearby, a security guard glanced his way, eyes narrowing with suspicion before turning back. Harris's chest tightened. He muttered, "Even monuments lie." His reflection blurred in the wet stone, distorted as if history itself twisted. The silence screamed louder than any gunfire. Emily Harris found Daniel Harris hunched at the kitchen table, the page spread flat under a lamp's glow. Emily Harris said, "I can't help if you keep pushing me away." Daniel's jaw tightened, eyes hollow. Daniel Harris said, "Every time I look at this I feel the walls closing in." She leaned closer, voice trembling. Emily Harris said, "Then don't carry it alone." Her compassion cut through his armor, but fear remained. He whispered, "This page is death, Emily. If you know, they'll come for you too." The lamp flickered as if agreeing with his paranoia. Daniel Harris stood outside his childhood home in the dead of night, Emily Harris watching silently from the doorway. Daniel Harris said, "They'll erase me, Em. When they do, remember I fought." His words trembled like confession. Emily Harris said, "You're my brother. They can't erase that." Her voice carried desperate resolve. The street was empty, rain misting under pale street lamps. Daniel clutched the page to his chest, breath clouding in the cold. For the first time, tears welled, blurring the lights. He whispered, "If they silence me, promise me you'll speak." Silence answered louder than her vow. Daniel Harris sat in his car across from a silent diner, night fog clinging to the windshield. He gripped the steering wheel as if it could anchor him in reality. Daniel Harris said, "They erased a man. Now they're erasing me." His whisper fogged the glass. Inside the diner, Sarah Mitchell sat in a booth, her pistol hidden under the table, eyes scanning. She appeared calm, but her shoulders betrayed tension. Daniel Harris muttered, "She'll kill me or save me, nothing between." The page in his pocket felt like it burned through fabric. A shadow shifted in the corner. Agent Sarah Mitchell noticed first. She tensed, fingers brushing the trigger. Daniel Harris watched through glass, his chest pounding. He muttered, "Even here, I'm hunted." The street outside was empty, but paranoia dripped heavier than the fog. Daniel Harris entered the diner, the bell above the door cutting through silence. He slid into the booth across from Sarah Mitchell, his jaw locked. Daniel Harris said, "If I'm already marked, then why not tell me the truth?" His tone was sharp, trembling at the edges. Sarah Mitchell's gaze softened for a second, but she shook her head. Sarah Mitchell said, "You don't understand. The truth kills more than lies ever will." She leaned closer, her voice lowering. Sarah Mitchell whispered, "Stop digging, before you're swallowed." Daniel clenched his fists, fury boiling. The door opened, and Richard Kane stepped inside, coat dripping from rain, authority radiating from every move. Richard Kane said, "You should have stayed buried in silence, Daniel." His tone was calm, dangerous. Daniel Harris reached for the page, heart racing. Sarah Mitchell's eyes darted between them, her mask cracking. Daniel Harris said, "This name is proof. You can't erase every grave." Kane smirked, shaking his head. Richard Kane said, "History belongs to the survivor, not the truth seeker." His presence filled the room like a storm. Daniel Harris pushed from the booth, standing tall though his hands shook. Daniel Harris said, "You can erase files but not blood." His voice carried through the quiet diner. Kane's smile vanished. Richard Kane said, "Blood spills easiest when it's forgotten." The silence was suffocating. Sarah Mitchell raised her weapon, torn between orders and conscience. "I." Sarah Mitchell said, "Don't make me choose, Daniel." Her eyes glistened under the flickering neon. Daniel Harris locked eyes with her, his chest rising like a man staring down the inevitable. The diner's lights flickered as a shot rang out. Plates shattered, neon buzzed, and silence followed. Daniel Harris clutched the charred page tighter, diving behind the counter. Richard Kane barked orders coldly. Richard Kane said, "Seal this city. He's not leaving alive." Sarah Mitchell hesitated, her weapon lowering a fraction. Sarah Mitchell whispered, "Run, Daniel." Her voice cracked with betrayal and loyalty colliding. Daniel Harris bolted through the kitchen door, his heart hammering, the page pressed like a curse against his chest. Daniel Harris stumbled into a warehouse near the docks, rainwater dripping from his jacket. The charred page felt heavier than steel in his pocket. He muttered, "If truth kills, then let it kill me clean." His voice echoed off rusted beams. Emily Harris appeared, her face pale in the half-light. Emily Harris said, "Daniel, they came to me. They said you're dangerous. They said you're sick." Her voice shook, torn between love and doubt. Daniel's chest tightened. Daniel Harris said, "They're twisting you, Em. Don't let them." From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, Mark Riley, alive, his uniform tattered. Daniel froze, eyes wide. Daniel Harris whispered, "Mark, you died in my arms." Riley's eyes burned with guilt. Mark Riley said, "What you held wasn't me. It was the cover for what I became." Daniel Harris's knees buckled, the world spinning. Daniel Harris said, "I buried you in blood, Mark. I carried your weight every night." His voice cracked with rage and grief. Mark Riley lowered his head. Mark Riley said, "I was never buried. They kept me alive, reshaped me, rewrote me." Emily Harris stared in disbelief, tears streaking her cheeks. Emily Harris said, "You're supposed to be dead." Riley's jaw trembled. Mark Riley said, "Dead was safer than what I became." Daniel felt betrayal pierce deeper than bullets. The page in his pocket pulsed like a curse. Richard Kane entered with his commanding stride, his voice cutting through the silence. Richard Kane said, "Now you see the rot. Riley never died. He was reborn to serve." His eyes were cold steel. Daniel Harris shouted, "You turned my brother-in-arms into a ghost." Riley's fists clenched as if shackled by invisible chains. Mark Riley said, "Every order I followed erased another man's truth." He stepped closer to Daniel, shame carved in his face. Richard Kane smirked. Richard Kane said, "Truth is a liability. Loyalty is survival." Sarah Mitchell stormed in, weapon raised, her face a battlefield of duty and doubt. Sarah Mitchell said, "Stop this before more blood spills." Richard Kane's glare burned. Richard Kane said, "Do your job, agent." Daniel Harris's voice cracked. Daniel Harris said, "You know this is wrong, Sarah." Emily Harris stepped between them, trembling but resolute. Emily Harris said, "If truth is poison, then let it kill us all. Better than living in chains." Silence fell heavy, the sound of dripping rain like a slow clock ticking toward destruction. Mark Riley broke, stepping forward with tears streaming. Mark Riley said, "Erase me, Daniel. End what I've become." His voice trembled with agony. Daniel Harris shook his head, the page clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Daniel Harris said, "No, I won't kill the last proof of what they did." Richard Kane roared, fury cracking his mask. Richard Kane said, "Then you'll both vanish, and no one will remember." Sarah Mitchell's hand shook violently, caught between orders and conscience. Emily Harris screamed, "Enough!" The warehouse shook with the weight of betrayal laid bare. The storm outside roared like judgment as Daniel Harris stood in the warehouse, soaked in sweat and fear. He clutched the page to his chest, every heartbeat a drum of defiance. Daniel Harris said, "If truth kills me, then I'll die standing." His voice was raw. Richard Kane raised his hand like a hammer of law, his glare piercing. Richard Kane said, "You'll die forgotten, Daniel. That's all your rebellion buys." His words struck colder than the rain dripping through the beams. Sarah Mitchell's pistol trembled, her knuckles white. Emily Harris stepped forward, defiance in her shaking body. Emily Harris said, "You can't erase family. You can't erase blood." Her tone cracked with courage. Mark Riley's voice broke with grief. Mark Riley said, "But they erased me, Emily. They turned me into their shadow." Daniel Harris raised the page high, his voice shaking yet unbroken. Daniel Harris said, "This paper is louder than your silence. It's proof you can't bury." Richard Kane's jaw tightened, rage breaking his mask. Richard Kane said, "Proof dies when its keeper dies." Sarah Mitchell lowered her gun slightly, caught in the fracture between orders and morality. Sarah Mitchell whispered, "Daniel, don't make me choose." Her eyes glistened, torn apart. Emily Harris shouted, "Then choose the truth." The storm outside cracked thunder as if answering her cry. Kane snapped his fingers, and shadows stirred. A figure emerged from the darkness, face hidden beneath a hood. The shadow operative stepped forward, weapon drawn with silent precision. Daniel Harris whispered, "So this is the hand that erases." His heart pounded with dread. Richard Kane smirked, calm as thunder cracked. Richard Kane said, "One move, and history forgets you all." Sarah Mitchell's eyes darted between Kane and the operative, horror dawning. Emily Harris clutched Daniel's arm, her tears burning. Emily Harris said, "Don't let them end us like ghosts." The shadow operative advanced with mechanical calm, boots echoing like execution drums. Sarah Mitchell's gun snapped upward, her breathing ragged. Sarah Mitchell shouted, "No, not like this." Her words split the silence. Richard Kane roared, "Obey your oath, agent." His fury shattered restraint. Daniel Harris grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her back. Daniel Harris said, "We'll fight, even if it kills us." His voice burned with finality. Mark Riley stepped into the operative's path, tears streaming. Mark Riley said, "Erase me if you must, but not them." The storm reached its peak as gunfire erupted. Sparks lit the warehouse, glass shattered, and screams merged with thunder. Daniel Harris dived, shielding Emily as the page crumpled in his grip. Daniel Harris shouted, "Truth doesn't die with me." His words roared above the chaos. Sarah Mitchell fired her bullet, striking the operative's arm, sending him staggering. Richard Kane's face twisted with fury. Richard Kane shouted, "You've doomed us all." Mark Riley lunged, wrestling the operative, blood spilling as steel met flesh. Emily Harris cried, "Daniel, run!" The storm swallowed her plea. The storm quieted to a mournful drizzle as smoke lingered in the broken warehouse. Daniel Harris knelt on shattered glass, the charred page crumpled in his blood-stained fist. Daniel Harris whispered, "Truth is bleeding, but it's still alive." His voice shook with exhaustion. Mark Riley lay on the floor, his chest rising faintly, blood pooling beneath him. Mark Riley gasped, "Don't waste it, Daniel. Make it count." His words faltered, eyes dimming but defiant. Emily Harris clutched his hand, sobbing. Emily Harris cried, "Stay with us, Mark. Please." Her plea tore through the silence. Richard Kane stood battered but unbroken, fury burning in his eyes. Richard Kane said, "One page won't undo a nation." His tone carried venom. Sarah Mitchell, weapon lowered, whispered, "Maybe one page is enough to unravel everything." The rain drummed like a slow heartbeat. Daniel Harris stood shakily, his body trembling under the weight of choice. Daniel Harris said, "I can bury this and live, or speak it and die." His eyes darted between Emily and the dying Riley. Richard Kane sneered. Richard Kane said, "Cowardice is survival, Daniel. Be wise." Sarah Mitchell's voice cracked with quiet strength. Sarah Mitchell said, "Silence is the machine's breath. Don't feed it." She stepped closer, eyes searching his face. Emily Harris whispered, "If you give up now, Daniel, they've already erased you." Her words struck deeper than Kane's threats. Daniel Harris pulled a radio from Riley's vest, static filling the air. His thumb hovered over the transmit button. Daniel Harris said one word, and this truth floods the world. His breath came in ragged bursts. Richard Kane roared, "You'll damn us all." His voice cracked with rage. Sarah Mitchell locked eyes with Daniel, a silent plea forming. Sarah Mitchell whispered, "Do it. Let them hear." Emily Harris nodded, tears glistening. Emily Harris said, "Speak, Daniel. Speak for all of them." Mark Riley coughed blood, a faint smile on his lips. Mark Riley said, "End the silence." The radio crackled alive, Daniel Harris pressing the button with trembling conviction. Daniel Harris said, "This is Captain Daniel Harris." They erased a soldier, a brother, a man who bled for this flag. His voice echoed across static. Richard Kane lunged, shouting, "Stop him!" His face twisted with panic. Sarah Mitchell raised her pistol, blocking Kane's path. Sarah Mitchell said, "It's over, Colonel." Her voice was steel. Emily Harris clutched Daniel's arm, whispering through sobs. Emily Harris said, "You did it." Mark Riley exhaled. His last breath carried on Daniel's words. Silence followed, heavier than thunder. Daniel Harris lowered the radio, tears streaking through soot on his face. Daniel Harris whispered, "He exists. And now, so does the truth." His body swayed with exhaustion. Sarah Mitchell holstered her weapon, her expression solemn. Sarah Mitchell said, "You lit the fire. Now it will spread." Richard Kane, restrained by defeat, muttered, "History won't remember you." Emily Harris stepped forward, voice steady. Emily Harris said, "Maybe history won't, but we will." She wrapped her arms around Daniel, grounding him in a storm of sacrifice. The page slipped from his hand, landing beside Riley's still body. Dawn broke across the city, but for Daniel Harris it felt like twilight. He walked through empty streets, the weight of silence pressing on his shoulders. Daniel Harris whispered, "The war wasn't overseas. It was here all along." His voice cracked with truth. Emily Harris followed a few steps behind, her face pale but determined, carrying the memory of Riley close. Emily Harris said, "You're not alone, Daniel. Not anymore." Her words were soft yet grounding. Sarah Mitchell trailed silently, her gaze heavy with guilt and resolve. Richard Kane sat in a government car parked nearby, his eyes cold, watching the three figures fade into the city. Richard Kane muttered, "History bends, but it doesn't break." His bitterness leaked through clenched teeth as his shadow loomed. Daniel Harris stood at Riley's unmarked grave, rain beginning to fall again. He placed the charred page atop the soil, the ink barely visible. Daniel Harris whispered, "Your name was never written, but the graves remember." His voice carried like a vow. Emily Harris placed her hand on his shoulder, silent tears streaking her cheeks. Emily Harris said, "They can't erase what's carved in memory." Sarah Mitchell bowed her head, her hand gripping her sidearm like an oath. Richard Kane's absence was louder than any presence. The radio static still hummed faintly in Daniel's pocket, fragments of his broadcast echoing. Daniel Harris said, "Even if they bury it, someone heard. Someone will remember." His tone was weary but resolute. Sarah Mitchell answered, "The machine is wounded, but it will fight back." Her words were grave. Emily Harris clenched her fists, her voice breaking but fierce. Emily Harris said, "Then we'll fight too. For Riley. For the Eras." Daniel nodded slowly, the rain masking his tears as thunder rolled distantly. The war had shifted, but not ended. Back in the city, screens flickered with news anchors reading cryptic leaks, words trembling with half-truths. Daniel Harris watched from a rooftop, the skyline drenched in stormlight. Daniel Harris said, "The truth's out there now, scattered like ash." His voice was steady, haunted. Sarah Mitchell stood beside him, arms crossed. Sarah Mitchell said, "It won't be enough. They'll bury it again." Daniel shook his head. Daniel Harris said, "They can bury bones, but not echoes." Emily Harris leaned against the railing, whispering, "Echoes last longer than lies." The wind carried silence across the rooftop. Daniel Harris pulled the radio from his pocket, switched it off and let it drop. It shattered on the concrete like the end of an era. Daniel Harris whispered, "This mission does not exist." His words vanished into the storm. Emily Harris closed her eyes, gripping his hand tightly. Sarah Mitchell exhaled, her weapon finally holstered. Behind them, the city's lights flickered as if uncertain whether to burn or fade. Richard Kane's shadow remained in the distance, watching, waiting. The tape had ended, but the silence screamed louder.